And welcome back. We are now going to look at the next symbol type, which is known as a button. Now, buttons are a lot of times used to execute things like actions or different things that are going to interact with the environment in some way. And what we're going to do is create a real simple animation that's going to allow us to do that. So to get started, I went ahead and imported this backdrop layer here. And I want to add in things that are going to effectively allow me to animate them. So for this one, I'm just going to do a real simple thing here. I'm going to just go ahead and import to my stage. I'm going to choose to use that plane.png that we had done previously. I'm going to take my free transform tool. Let's go ahead and just kind of shrink him down. And what I want him to do is I want him to effectively just fly across this sky here. And I want that to be when that happens if I press, for example, a play button. So I'm just going to shrink him down just a little bit more. That looks pretty good there. And I actually want to put him on his own layer so it's separate from this backdrop. So let's Control X to cut. And I'm going to make a new layer. And let's go ahead and just right click and hit paste on the layer 2 there. And notice how it keeps trying to go back to the backdrop. So we're just going to lock that layer so that way we don't have that. And now we can paste in place. And I'm going to rename this as plane. All right, and we have this almost set up. Let's just go ahead and add enough frames so we have a 1 second animation. And I'm just going to go ahead and create this plane with just, let's say, a classic tween. It's going to say, hey, we got to make this a symbol, no problem. And all I want to do is take this guy, so when it gets to frame 30, I want to take him and move him across the screen to maybe here. So that way we have point A to B. Of course, we can refine that if we need to. But just for this purpose of this demonstration today, we're just going to make it a pretty straightforward, he's flying pretty much straight across the screen here. I might, of course, resize him too. Maybe I want him to start just a little smaller, so I'm just going to shrink him down just a little bit. And there we go. That looks like a pretty good animation to start. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and actually get to making a button here that we can use within our animation. So let's go ahead and make a new layer for our button. And I'm just going to go ahead and rename that as button. And what I want to do is actually keep that in a way separate from these other animations. So I'm just going to actually insert a keyframe here. Just that way I know that there's going to be one here. So let's go to frame number 2. Put a keyframe right there. Just so again, that's separate from that first one. And we're just going to use our rectangle tool here. And let's just go ahead and just draw in a rectangle. And we can choose to make that whatever color we want. So for example, I might choose, I want something maybe a little more purplish, for example, to start. We can do whatever we want, but this red one is fine for us to start. And what we want to do, of course, is maybe add some text to that because we want to add something that gives us some kind of instruction. So like, for example, click to play. And I might stretch it out just a little bit just to make sure that this can fit. Use my selection tool here to drag that down on top of the rectangle. And we can edit this text to different fonts. So for example, you notice right now it's Comic Sans. So if we wanted it to be a different font, I could select this, for example, and I could easily come in here and choose a different font of what I want it to be. But for today's purpose, Comic Sans will be fine. You can choose whatever font you want. You can change the fill color, but this will be fine for us to start. Now, once we've created this button, we need to make sure that we have this button here ready to go. I'm just going to lock our plane layer right now because I don't want to accidentally move that. But we make sure we select both of these here because we want to make sure we get both the text and the rectangle here to make our button, because otherwise I might just have one. So I'm just going to, again, click and select both items. And then what I'm going to do is right click on those and I'm going to choose to convert that to a symbol. And now I have, of course, the option to make my button. And I'm just going to go ahead and call this play_button. Click OK. And now it's transformed this here into a button. And you can see that the type registers as a button. So now we can actually start giving it behaviors and different things like that. So if I were to double click on this button, one of the things you'll notice is that we now have different properties in here. So we have up, over, down, and hit. So this allows us, for example, to set, different colors. So if I were to just insert frames here for each of these, or let's just put a different keyframe in here actually, so that we have different behaviors for each of these. So for example, if I want over means if I were to hover my mouse over this, I want it to have its own property. So I could click on that button, for example, and maybe I want to change the fill color. Maybe if I'm hovering over that, I want that to be more of an orangish color because we started red, so we're going to go more orange. Maybe if I click down on it, I can, of course, change that color again. So I'm going to click on it, and I can maybe make that a yellow and hit. Let's go ahead and just do the same thing. Let's go ahead and make one more color option here. We're just going to go ahead and make that one a blue, so it's nice and distinct. And again, that's going to give us different properties here to this button based upon what someone does with it. All right. Now, if I want to get back to my main scene, you notice that all the layers aren't here. That's because we're kind of in what's known as an envelope. You can see up here, we have the play button, and we have scene 1. We can either click right on scene 1 to go to that layer, or we can click this little back arrow here, and it'll take us back to our full scene proper. You will see that other layers are now present, and we have created this button. All right, now that we have this set up, let's go ahead and actually add in the properties to make this a clickable button that's going to execute code. And we don't actually have to write code for this because there's actually code snippets that are built right in with Adobe Animate that will allow us to do the things that we want. So here in my button, remember we made that first keyframe. And there's a reason for that because we want it to pretty much pause effectively right here at this point when this animation first starts. So I'm just going to right click on button here. And you can see we have different options that are available to us. All right, they're pretty familiar to us. But what we want to do is actually insert code snippets here at that point. And if you notice where those are present, and that's because for code snippets, we actually need to go to a new window. So let's go to Window. And we have a bunch of different options here that are available to us. But code snippets is right here in the middle. And this will allow us to bring up the things that we want to work with here for our button option. Again, those weren't found when we right-clicked and on either the symbol or in our layers panel because it is its own separate window. So here is ActionScript, which is what we are currently working in. So I'm just going to open that up. And you can see that we have different options in here. All right, so we have actions, timeline navigation, etc. We're going to first start with a timeline navigation. And we want to choose stop at this frame because what we want to do is we don't want to run this animation all the way through until we've clicked this button. So the first thing we want to do is very much to stop this animation. So I just double click stop at this frame and you will see it loads this action 1, which is stop. All right, which again, that pauses that animation until we have done something else. Now, if we want to actually execute this, you'll notice we have some other codes in here. We want this click go to frame and play because what that's going to do is allow us to jump ahead to whatever frame we actually want the animation started with. So I'm just going to go ahead and double click that and we see we get this prompt that says this action requires object to be selected, and it's because if we look at our current active layers, it has moved it to the actions layer. So I'm going to go and click back on button here, and now that I'm on that button layer here and I can click back on that keyframe where I was, I can go and click on the go to frame and play. All right, it says it requires an instance name. We can just click OK. And one of the things you'll see that it has added in that code. Here's our stop that we still had in here. But then we now have this mouse event here that says .click, which means when we click on our button, it's going to go ahead and add some animation. And what it's going to do is it says go to and play 5. Now this 5 here is referring to what frame do you actually want your animation to start at. And because effectively we have this keyframe here where nothing is happening and the animation is truly kind of starting at frame 2, we can just go ahead and start this at frame 2. Now if our animation started, let's say we just had nothing happening until let's say frame 10, then we could put frame 10 in here. Now there are things that we can do with labels and stuff like that so we don't have to hard code a number in here, but for today's purpose this will be enough. All right, once that code is in there, we can look and see that should do what we need to do. But let's go ahead and test out and make sure that we didn't miss anything here. So I can go ahead and go up here to my different controls here, and I can test this to see what this animation would look like. And you can see here's my button. As I hover over it, you can see that it now changes colors as I move my mouse over it. And if I click on that, you can see now the character moves across the screen. So again, that is a pretty cool thing that happens, and you can see the button does also go out of the way too when we're playing, so it doesn't remain in the screen because we keyframed it so it only exists within that first frame. If I didn't keyframe it, we'd probably have this click to play happening across the entire animation, which is not what we want. So again, a nice cool thing that we can learn how to do. It shows us our third symbol type and allows us to create animations that are now much more interactive.